I watched a review on YouTube published by one of the leading motorcycle magazines a few weeks ago, and a well-known motorcycle journalist summed the Bobber up. He called it a Marmite bike. You either love it or you hate it. I think part of the Bobber's problem, its image if you like, is the fact that people don't really understand what the bike is. A lot of YouTube reviewers refer to it as a cruiser, which it most certainly is not. And I think to understand the concept of what the Bobber is, you need to go right back into ancient motorcycling history. Now in 1937, I think it was, Edward Turner, chief designer at Triumph, unveiled his latest design, the Triumph Speed Twin. A 500cc twin-cylinder motorcycle that was to set the blueprint for motorcycle design for the next few decades and was the great-grandfather of the Bonneville motorcycle as we know it. A few short years later, World War II broke out and motorcycle design stagnated for over 7 years. Motorcycle racing across the globe stopped, and after the war had finished, a movement began to get motorcycle racing up and running again. The only problem was motorcycle design was about 10 years behind. The likes of Triumph, Norton and BSA had been producing bikes for the war effort for the last 7 years, and had little time to do anything else. So the only bikes that were available were either antiquated ex-army bikes or those bikes that had actually survived the war, bikes from the 1930s. Bikes like the Speed Twin. Now enthusiasts, in an effort to get these motorcycles race-worthy, whether it be hill climbing, grass tracking or road racing, stripped these bikes back of all non-essential weight in order to raise the power to weight ratio. Here in the UK there wasn't any particular name for it, but in the States it became known as a bob job or a bobtail, a reference to a shortening of the rear mudguard in order to get rid of some weight. These were bikes that we now know as bobbers. They were competition machines. The conversions had nothing to do with style. These were the forerunners of the cafe racers. Now to my eye, the Bobber and the Bobber Black are the 21st century recreation of that original Speed Twin. But Triumph couldn't really call it a Speed Twin because they've already got the Street Twin and that would just confuse customers. So the guys in the marketing department decided to call it the Bobber. It's a name that to my mind is a little bit cliched, but it hasn't done this bike any harm. Triumph report that in their 115 years of motorcycle production history, the original Bobber has become the fastest selling motorcycle they've ever made. Now, flushed by their success with that first Bobber model, a year later Triumph decided to have another go, and in doing so they turned to the dark side with the Bobber Black. As has become the fashion these days, absolutely everything is blacked out. There's no chrome on this bike anywhere. But unlike other all black versions in the Bonneville range, Triumph in the process decided to feed the Bobber some steroids. The 41mm front forks were replaced with 47mm forks. The front wheel was downsized from a 19-inch to a 16-inch with balloon tyres, giving the bike a more balanced and muscular look. The Bates style headlamp has gone all LED, and the bike now has Triumph's own electronic cruise control, something that used to be a £250 option. And as if that wasn't enough, Triumph have also added some twin piston Brembos to the front end, as opposed to the single twin piston Nissin that the original Bobber had. Now these additional baubles do come at a price, not just financially, although the Bobber Black is over £1,000 more expensive than the standard Bobber, but also in the weight department. These alterations add around 9 kilograms to the overall weight of the Bobber, which now has a curb weight approaching 240 kilograms, something that doesn't go unnoticed when you're manoeuvring the bike in and out of the garage or trying to extract it from a parking space. And this is further compounded by an unconventional frame and seat design. From the front, the bike has quite a modern, aggressive stance, but when you view it in profile, it is pure 1940s with a modern twist. Triumph realised with the early water-cooled twins that period vintage features sell bikes. So the red spark plug caps remain, as do the fake AML monoblock carburetors and pseudo air intakes. But with with the Bobber, Triumph have taken this just a little bit further. The battery box is made to look like an old vintage 1940s style battery. The ignition switch has been moved to just in front of the right hand side panel, with the steering lock back on the headstock as it was in the old air-cooled twins, albeit that this time the mechanism is much easier to use. The single seat again is very much a 1930s, 1940s period feature, and in homage to that original Speed twin, they've given the bike a rigid frame look with a modern monoshock suspension that's designed to mimic the lines of that original Speed twin. The seat does have some adjustment, and by unfastening a few bolts it can be slid backwards and forwards. Likewise, the instrument binnacle can be adjusted for tilt by means of a bicycle quick release style lever. Both the front and the rear mudguards are made of steel, the front mudguard also doubling up as a fork brace. They're both painted black, and along with everything else on the bike, the paint is a glass smooth finish. I've been riding the bike for a week now and there are no niggles like the ones that I had with the T120. Fit and finish is top notch and I've got no complaints anywhere. The bike has LED lighting all round and there's no rev counter on the instrument panel, albeit there's no analog rev counter. But you do have access to a digital rev counter along with other information on the LCD display if you should want it. On startup, the slash cut pipes, the only nod to modernity that I can see on this bike, do let out a nice rumbling tone, although it still is a little bit muted for my tastes. Once you're on the move with this bike, the weight is forgiven and forgotten. The bike is very low with a seat height of only 27 inches, which initially gives the impression that you're going faster than you actually are. Straight line stability is sweet and neutral, but coasting along in straight lines is not what this bike is about. Contrary to what you might expect, this bike is a light, agile and nimble machine on the move at speed. Those huge balloon tyres give you enormous amounts of grip with the larger surface area, and the Trick 16-inch front wheel goes exactly where you point it each time, every time. I hesitate to say this, but in my opinion this bike handles better than the T120. The shower cartridge front forks only have 90mm of travel, and the KYB suspension at the rear only gives around 77mm. And on a heavy bike like the Bobber, this means that the suspension has to be stiff, but that's what provides some of the magic with the handling of this bike. The suspension in general acts very much like you would expect on a track bike. At low speeds on bad roads it can feel a little bit uncomfortable, but once you open the throttle up, it irons out all but the worst of the bumps with ease, keeping the tyres in contact with the road and keeping the chassis taut and controlled. The ride at speed is significantly better than at low speed, something that I've encountered with the Hagen Nitros in the past. And this all comes together to create a package that makes you feel invincible. Don't get me wrong, if you push the bike too far it will let you know, but in general terms the handling is safe, reliable and precise. In fact, it handles far above and beyond anything that you've got any right to expect it to. The Bobber's powered by the Bonneville 1200cc high torque engine, very similar to what is fitted in some of their other models, but it's been retuned. In this iteration it produces 10% more torque low down in the rev range, and this does wonders for the tractability of this bike. In urban riding in slow moving traffic in first and second gear, the EU emissions claptrap rears its ugly head and the throttle becomes an embarrassing on-off switch. But once you get into third gear this disappears, and the beauty of this engine is that you can get into third gear earlier. This tweak that Triumph have made to the engine makes an astounding difference. Acceleration in any gear feels much stronger than it does on the T120, and you certainly don't find yourself having to swap cogs quite so often. I've no doubt that this is at the expense of top-end performance, but who cares? This bike is not about top-end performance anyway. The engine provides you with gutsy, satisfying acceleration in any gear and feels far more forgiving than in the T120 version. And to top it off, it's slightly better on fuel economy as well. And I found that after 2 tanks of fuel over a week's riding, it was returning around about 72 miles to the gallon. If you push the bike hard, this significantly drops, however, and you can find yourself quite quickly in the mid-50s. The rear brake is nothing to shout home about. You can stamp on that as hard as you like, not an awful lot happens. But the twin piston Brembos at the front are significantly better. Gentle pressure from your hand will reward you with a good, gradual and predictable braking effect. In an emergency though, a good hard yank on the brakes will stop the bike in its tracks. They are a significant improvement over the Nissans. And the 47mm showers up front also make a huge difference here. I've yet to experience any fork flex. The bar end mirrors look the part, and more importantly, they do the job well, giving excellent rearward vision. Although I would say they do look and feel a little bit plasticky and not quite as premium as the rest of the bike. I would describe the seating position as a sort of an aggressive sit-up and beg position. Your feet do rest quite high up in front of you. You have to sort of tuck your knees up in front of your stomach a little bit and lean forward. More of an old school racing stance than a touring stance. This is great when you're travelling at speed because it does take some of the pressure off your neck muscles. The only downside of this is that you are sitting on what I think the cycling world calls your sit bones. The seat isn't particularly generously padded, and I found by the time that I've got about 50 miles under my belt, I do find that there's a bit of numbness creeping in. As you all probably know, the bike does have a limited fuel range anyway, so this isn't such a problem because regular comfort brakes are always a feature of my rides anyway. So far I've managed to squeeze about 130 miles between fill-ups, which isn't brilliant, but it's not atrocious either. And putting things into perspective, certainly here in the UK, you can't generally travel 20 miles without coming across a fuel station anyway. Taking into account both performance and handling, I would categorise this bike as fitting somewhere between the Triumph T120 and the Thruxton. The Bobber is only a single seater. Now if you're buying it as a second bike, that's not really a problem. But if it's going to be your one and only bike, you need to put things into perspective. How often does your better half really ride with you? Generally speaking, most of us do most of our riding solo, and our partners or spouses may only interact with our motorcycling interest 3 or 4 times a year. And if that's the case, should you really base your decision on buying a motorcycle on that 3 or 4 times a year? It's obvious to me from the comments and emails that I've received over the last week that there are a lot of people sitting on the fence over this bike. They love the look of it, and who wouldn't? It is drop dead gorgeous. But for the most part, what seems to me to be the problem, the sticking point, if you like, over their decisions to purchase, is the name, the Bobber. For many people, this conjures up an image of a hipster lifestyle, something which isn't really them. It's not me either. What is in a name? When you look at the Bobber, forget the name. As I've said, as far as I'm concerned, this is a 21st century version of the original Triumph Speed Twin, the bike that set the standard for every parallel twin that's been made since. It's a nod to British motorcycling heritage at its best. And if you take away anything from this video at all, forget the Bobber name and just take that with you. Is it the kind of bike that's going to attract the girl of your dreams? Probably not, but that's just as well because there'd be nowhere for her to sit. In many ways, this is the kind of bike that dreams are made of. It attracts a lot of attention, just like the other Bonnevilles, and deservedly so, because it's a very provocative and sexy looking motorcycle that actually performs better than it looks. I'm not ashamed to admit it. This is one of those bikes that provokes the occasional trouser tent moment, and for some men of a certain age, that's got to be a bonus in itself. Now that's about all I've got time for in this particular video. I hope you've enjoyed it and that you found it useful. If you have enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. I will leave a link to Motone Customs bobber page, the parts that they have available for the bobber so far, in the video description down below if you'd like to have a look. Thanks for watching. I will be back again next week, so until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.